Hello to all my friends at the fountains. It's been a while, and we're almost at Thanksgiving, and we are also looking at a lot of hope once we get past this winter that we're all going to be able to get together pretty soon, face to face. I'm looking forward to that. But for today, recently you've seen a production of The Jersey Boys. And so the musical itself is about the four seasons and what went on in their lives. But today I'm going to be talking about the backstory of the four seasons, especially their musical style. We're going to explore the music from the 30s, 40s, and 50s that influenced the sound of the group, and actually the sound of many of the hits from the late 50s and early 60s. The Four Seasons were one of only two American bands, the other being the Beach Boys, to have hit records during what was called the British invasion that began with the Beatles. Now, what is the Four Seasons musical style? If you look them up, they're formally defined as an American rock and doo-wop band from the 1960s and 70s. So, let's look at the evolution of their musical sound. We're going to focus on doo-wop, which is a type of rhythm and blues vocal music very popular in the 1950s and 60s. Combined with what was happening in country music, these strains, rhythm and blues, doo-wop, country, all came together in the United States and eventually morphed into rock and roll. Doo-wop grew from a type of rhythm and blues that was mostly vocal, with instrumental backing ranging from a full orchestra to none, but it was usually pretty simple, the background. It was most often performed by a group, frequently a quartet, similar to the black gospel tradition, using very close harmonies, and this style was nearly always performed in a slow to medium tempo. You didn't really have too many up-tunes going on here with this. The lead voice was usually a tenor, a higher voice, and that would sing the melody of the song over the wordless chords of the other singers, or would go back and forth with them in kind of a call and response exchange. The term doo-wop comes from the sounds made by the group as they provided harmonic background for the lead singer. The lyrics are always simple, usually about love. Doo-wop street singers usually performed without instruments, using the doo-wop syllables as a substitute, say, for drums, and a bass vocalist as a substitute for a bass instrument. So we're going to listen now. Oh, by the way, these examples are all going to be very, very short, no more than 30 seconds. But in speaking about music, it really does help to actually hear what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to I have a number of examples, but they're all very, very short, just to give you a sonic representation of the evolution of this style of music. So, we're going to hear an early recording of the Triangle Quartet's record, Doodlin' Back. Now, this is all the way from 1929, and it prefigured doo-wop's rhythm and blues sound long before doo-wop became popular. So here is Doodlin' Back. So scratchy. And here at the very end, the bass went dum, dum, dum. So you're starting to hear the very, very beginnings of this kind of style. Now, 10 years later, 1939, there was the Cats and the Fiddle. That was a group with their song, I Miss You So. And now let's hear what it sounds like 10 years later. Very strong bass in here. High tenor, and that kind of oh in the background in harmony.
Most of all,
So you can hear the style slightly evolving there. Now, doo-wop came under the category of rhythm and blues, and it was originally labeled race music by the record companies. Its popularity among both black and white young audiences actually helped to bring about changes in racial relations in American society. By 1948, RCA Victor was marketing black music under the name Blues and Rhythm. A year later, in 1949, Jerry Wexler reversed the words, coined the name Rhythm and Blues to replace the term race music for Billboard magazine's black music chart. In the 1940s, there were many hit songs by black groups such as the Ink Spots and the Mills Brothers. They were generally slow songs in swing time with simple instrumentation. Now they're important because their style was the direct antecedent of doo-wop. So we're going to hear first a brief example of the Ink Spots' I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire.
I've lost all ambition for worldly acclaim. I just want to be the one you love. And with your admission that you feel the same, I have reached the goal I'm dreaming of. Believe me, I don't want to set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart.
And the Mills Brothers had a very popular record, strongly influenced doo-wop's characteristic vocal style. And we're going to hear a brief excerpt from Mills Brothers' Paper Doll.
I'm going to buy a paper doll that I can call my own. A doll that other fellows cannot steal. And then the flirty, flirty guys with their flirty, flirty eyes will have to flirt with dolls that are real. When I come home at night, she will be waiting.
So you can hear now these harmonies are getting really clear, really sophisticated, actually. Now the other thing the Mills Brothers did, they would mimic instruments with their voices, and this was another influence on street vocal harmony groups who would sing a cappella arrangements, which is a cappella, no instrumentation, only voice. They would use vocal sounds to mimic the musical instruments. So for example, the doomph plucking of a double bass, you would have a person singing very low voice, bass, doing that instead. So there are 5 features of doo-wop music. Vocal music, made by groups. 2, features a wide range of vocal parts, usually all the way from bass to falsetto. Everything is represented there. It includes nonsense syllables, a simple beat, very low-key instrumentation, and it has simple words and music. So now a little bit about the structure. The song Blue Moon was written in 1934, and Heart and Soul was written early on in the 20th century. And they used a type of chord progression for you theorists out there, a 1-6-2-5 loop. And I'm just going to play this for you, exactly what that loop sounds like. Listen to the 3rd chord especially. There's the 3rd chord. Okay. Composers of doo-wop songs then varied this slightly, but pretty significantly, to the chord progression 1-6-4-5. That 3rd chord was changed. It was so influential that it became known as the 50s progression. 2. And there it is. There's the 3rd chord. 2, 3. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your head. After World War II, this type of vocal harmony group tradition was the most popular form of rhythm and blues among black teenagers, especially those living in large urban centers like New York, Chicago, Detroit, or Baltimore. Now, you could really hear background nonsense syllables used, the doo-wop. You can hear them used repeatedly in this song, Just a Sittin' and a Rockin', recorded by the Delta Rhythm Boys in December 1945.
What's the good of having money when you haven't got your honey? I don't go out walking. I ain't for no talking.
Doo-wop.
My baby's done left me, just a sitting and a rocking. Now if I had been scheming, instead of just dreaming, she'd never have left me, just a sitting and a rocking.
By the mid-50s, vocal groups had changed from the smooth delivery of ballads into a performance style that incorporated these nonsense phrases vocalized by the bass singers. Bass singers became very, very important. And this provided the rhythmic propulsion, the rhythmic movement for these songs. Soon, other doo-wop groups entered the pop charts, particularly in 1955, which saw such crossover doo-wop hits as Sincerely by the Moonglows, and listen to the bass there. And the woo. And there's that progression, the 50s progression.
Sincerely, oh yes, sincerely, 'cause I love you so dearly.
Okay, I'm going to play a few of these songs now that were making the charts in those days. This next one, very popular doo-wop song from that year, same year, 1955, by the Penguins, and this is Earth Angel. And there's the 50s progression again.
Earth angel, will you be mine, my darling dear? Love you all the time. I'm just a fool in love with you.
And the Cadillacs, Gloria. This is interesting. He starts coming closer. Yeah, I didn't do that. Here's the bass.
In that Maria, Gloria, in that Jerry, Gloria, but she's not in love with me.
The Heartbeats, 1,000 miles away.
1,000 miles away, but I still have your love to remember. If I, oh my darling, dry your eyes. Daddy's coming, how soon?
going on here, but this is a sound that was definitely working. These were all hits. And I do want to play a little part of one that is actually one of my favorites, and it's the Flamingos' I Only Have Eyes for You.
My love must be a kind of blind love. I can't see anyone but you.
I can't do it. Another kind of background, you can hear the bass.
Are the stars out tonight? I don't know if it's cloudy or bright.
So now, let's look at the music from Chicago. The city of Chicago was the second most important recording center in the United States in the early years of music recording industry, second to New York. During the late 40s and early 50s, small independent record labels gained control of the black record market from the major companies, and Chicago rose as an important center for rhythm and blues music. This music was a vital source for the development of rock and roll. In the mid-50s, a number of rhythm and blues acts performing in the vocal ensemble style, later known as doo-wop, began to cross over from the R&B charts into mainstream rock and roll. The Chicago record companies noticed this trend, and they started scouting for vocal groups from the city that they could sign onto their labels. VJ Records and Chess Records were the main labels recording doo-wop groups in Chicago. One of VJ's groups was the Dells. We're going to hear them now. Remember VJ Records, they play a very important part later on in the development of music. So here is the Dells' Oh What a Night.
Oh, what a night.
During this time, white artists such as Elvis Presley performed and recorded covers of rhythm and blues songs that were then marketed to a white audience. This also helped to bring together audiences and artists who shared an interest in the music. Black and white young people both wanted to see popular rhythm and blues and doo-wop acts perform, and racially mixed groups of teenagers would stand on inner-city street corners and sing doo-wop songs a cappella. Of course, this angered white supremacists, who considered rhythm and blues and rock and roll a danger to America's youth. There were two big rhythm and blues hits by vocal harmony groups, G by the Crows and Shaboom by the Chords. They crossed over into the pop music charts in 1954. Shaboom is considered to have been the first R&B rhythm and blues record to break into the top 10 on the Billboard charts. So here is the Chords' Shaboom.
Life could be a dream, life could be a dream. Shaboom.
Life could be a dream if I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love, life could be a dream. Sweetheart, hello, hello again. Shaboom, and open my media boom. Ding dong, ding dong, shalang, lang, lang, hum, boom, boom, dip. I live it over dip. Oh, life could be a dream.
If only all my precious plans would come true. If you would let me spend my whole life loving you, life would be a dream, sweetheart.
And you hear they delang, delang, delang. So you started having, even exploring even more nonsense syllables in this. Okay, so here's your R&B hit. It's crossed over. Billboard goes into the top 10. A few months later, a white group from Canada, the Crew Cuts, released their cover of the song, which reached number 1, remained there for 9 weeks. So here is the Crew Cuts version of Shaboom.
Oh, life could be a dream if I could take you up in paradise up above. If you would tell me I'm the only one that you love, life could be a dream, sweetheart. Hello, hello again, shaboom, and hoping we'll meet again. Oh, life could be a dream if only all my precious plans would come true. If you would let me spend my whole life loving you, life could be a dream, sweetheart. Now every time I look at you.
Okay, so you can see the similarities of the song. You'd also hear a lot of differences in it. The reality at the time was that black groups could not get airplay on white radio stations. So the fact that the original Shaboom was able to break into the charts is absolutely remarkable, but they did not get a lot of help from the white stations. Most would refuse to play it. So that's why a group like the Crew Cuts could get on with pretty much the exact same song and really chart with it. 1955, the Platters had a number 1 pop chart with The Great Pretender.
Oh, yes, I'm the great pretender. Pretending that I'm doing well. My need is such, I pretend too much. I'm lonely, but no one can tell. Oh, yes.
Okay, you can also hear with the lead singer there, you start having a bit more of an overwrought type sound, and this was quite popular at the time. But now, things changed a little bit in this sound. 1956, Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers appeared on the Frankie Lane Show in New York. This was televised nationally, and they performed their hit, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? There's the bass. So in that you can really hear the beginnings of soul, of the Motown sound, of Michael Jackson. This is a totally different kind of voice. Lyman was a young fellow, was a teenager. And so really fascinating to hear the beginnings of that sound. Now, doo-wop groups were also formed by young Italian Americans. And like their black counterparts, they lived in rough neighborhoods, and they practiced this new style of singing on street corners. New York was the capital of Italian doo-wop, and all its boroughs were home to groups that made very successful records. By the late 50s and early 60s, many Italian-American groups had national hits. Dion and the Belmonts had a hit record with Teenager in Love. So here is Dion and the Belmonts.
Each time we have a quarrel, it almost breaks my heart, 'cause I'm so afraid that we will have to part. Each night I ask the stars up above, why must I be a teenager in love? One day I feel so.
So in all of these examples, really you can start hearing, the germs, the very, very beginning of what the sound would be for the Four Seasons. This is all their genealogy. It's really quite fascinating. Also during this time, the Capris made their name, another Italian-American group, with There's a Moon Out Tonight.
There's a moon out tonight. Let's go strolling. There's a girl in my heart whose heart I've stolen. There's a moon out tonight. Let's go strolling through the park.
So the genre of doo-wop actually reached the self-referential stage with songs about the singers themselves. One song by Johnny Cymbal, Mr. Bassman, and this was in 1961. And I will find it. Here it is.
Mr. Bassman, you got that certain something. Mr. Bassman, you said that music thumping. To you it's easy when you go 1, 2, 3, yeah, Mr. Bassman, you're on all the songs with a boom 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 and a boom boom boom. Hey, Mr. Bassman, you're the hidden king of rock and roll. Oh, it don't mean a thing when the lead is singing or when he goes hi. Hey, Mr. Bassman.
So you can hear that they're actually mentioning the bassman, and then they're also talking about the falsetto, which is so typical of this time period. And the other one, that very, very self-aware song, is Barry Mann, Who Put the Bomb? And this goes through various nonsense syllables.
Who put the bomb in the bomb, the bomb, the bomb? Who put the rhyme in the rammel and the ding dong? Who put the bop in the bop, shabop, shabop? Who put the dip in the dip, dip, dip? Who was that man? I'd like to shake his hand. He made my baby fall in love with me. When my baby heard bom, 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 every word went right into her heart. And when she heard them singing, rama, 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 ding dong, she said we'd never have to part.
So, really interesting that although this particular musical style originated in the 1940s, was very popular in the 1950s, the actual term doo-wop did not appear in print until 1961. It was used referring to the Marcels song Blue Moon. Remember I mentioned Blue Moon before, written in 1934. Okay, so here's a version now we're going to listen to. And kind of ironic, because this happened just as the style's popularity had pretty much peaked and was coming to an end. So here are the Marcels singing Blue Moon.
Bomb, 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 dang, 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 ding, dong, ding, blue moon, 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 blue moon, dip, 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 moon, 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 blue moon, dip, 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 moon, 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 blue moon, dip, 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 bomb, 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 dang, 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 ding, dong, ding, blue moon, moon, blue moon. rendezvous.
Okay. So pop R&B groups, including the Coasters, the Drifters, the Platters, helped link the doo-wop style to the mainstream and also to the future sound of soul music. And I want to play one more of these doo-wop. This is the Drifters, Under the Boardwalk.
Under the boardwalk, down by the street, yeah. On a blanket with my baby, that's where I'll be.
Under the boardwalk,
Out of the
Here's the call and response.
boardwalk,
we'll be having some fun.
under the boardwalk,
People walking above.
under the boardwalk,
We'll be falling in love.
under the boardwalk, boardwalk.
So, brings us to the Four Seasons. As I had mentioned earlier, they're one of the most successful white doo-wop groups of the 60s. Their records featured the falsetto voice of Frankie Valli. He had a 3-octave range. And during their nearly 40-year career, they sold over 100 million records. Frankie Valli was born Francis Castelluccio in 1937 in a tough working-class neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. Valli taught himself to sing by imitating other artists, and from the beginning he had an unusually high voice. He admired rhythm and blues bands, particularly the Clovers and the Drifters. When he was 7 years old, he heard a very young Frank Sinatra performing at the Paramount. It was a turning point for him, and he decided right then he was going to be a professional singer. As a teenager in the 1950s, Valli sang with several Jersey groups at school events and in local clubs. He recorded his first solo record in 1953 called My Mother's Eyes.
One bright and guiding light that taught me wrong from right. I found in my mother's eyes.
Okay, not exactly doo-wop, instrumentation is a little overwrought. But anyway, that was his first song. But you could hear the voice was really nice and clear, pure voice, was great. So, Frankie Valli then formed the Verytones in 1954. They changed their name to the Four Lovers in 1956 and signed with RCA Victor Records that same year. From 1956 to 1958, the group stayed together. They performed in clubs and lounges and recorded on music labels under various names. In fact, they went through about 18 different names. Some of them were Frankie Tyler, Frankie Valli and the Travelers, Frankie Valli and the Romans, the Village Voices, and the Topics. In 1961, the group changed their name for the last time to the Four Seasons. After a bowling alley in Union, New Jersey, they had auditioned for a job there in the cocktail lounge. They didn't get it, so they figured they had to get something that night, and they took the name the Four Seasons. Four Seasons then signed with a new production company, and they released their first single under their new name in 1961, Bermuda. I'll play a little bit of that for you now.
She went sailing on a coral sea.
Now, I don't know if if you could hear the bass in this if it came through on this transmission, but there is a very faint bass voice going boop, boop, underneath all of this. So you could hear their doo-wop roots in this piece. Anyway, the single did not chart. In 1962, with the help of their producer Bob Crew, the group signed a recording contract with VJ Records. Remember them, they were from Chicago, and they had been signing a lot of doo-wop groups in Chicago. And the Four Seasons became the label's first white act. And a very interesting factoid, a year later, the Beatles were signed to the same label. More on that later. In 1962, the group recorded its first mega hit, Sherry. The story goes that it was a peace offering to the group from their producer, Bob Crew. He had infuriated Valley by giving the song Don't Be Cruel to Elvis Presley to record. Of course, Presley had an incredible hit with that. And Frankie Valli was a little miffed that he didn't get a chance to do it first. Anyway, at first, Sherry received very limited airplay, but then the group appeared on Dick Clark's television show, American Bandstand. That gave the song so much exposure, it went straight to the top of the pop charts and earned the group its first gold record. So we'll hear a bit of Sherry now. The song was quickly followed by a second mega hit, Big Girls Don't Cry. Both tunes were certified platinum after remaining #1 hits for 5 weeks each. The Four Seasons had finally found their sound, and they continued to produce hits in 1963 with Walk Like a Man and Candy Girl. Here's Walk Like a Man. The other song was Candy Girl.
I've been a-searching on this big wide world. Now finally I found mine. Found me a girl. Sets my heart a whirl with hugging and kissing.
In 1964, the Four Seasons signed with Philip Records and had 6 songs in the top 20 that year. 6 songs. Stay, Dawn Go Away, Ronnie, Rag Doll, which was a #1 hit, Save It For Me, and Big Man in Town. This is remarkable, considering the Beatles were establishing themselves in 1963 and had their first American tour in February 1964. So I will play Rag Doll for you, which was a #1 hit. what made Valli uncommon as a singer was that stratospheric falsetto voice he had. Critics called Valli's vocals everything from shrill to shrieking, but the falsetto was his signature sound. His remarkable range allowed him to create these really incredible harmonies, and the spacing of the chords could be so different because of his range. Now, VJ Records was not doing well financially despite the band's success. The label had released several early Beatles singles in America. When the Beatles became amazingly popular, VJ was swamped with orders. They shipped more than 2 million Beatles records in a single month. But the demands of mass production were just too much, and there were severe cash flow problems. They ended up losing the Beatles when Trans Global canceled VJ's contract in August 1963 due to non-payment of royalties. VJ continued to produce one Beatles album in defiance of the cancellation, but Capitol Records was finally able to stop VJ effective October 1964. While the label was going through all this drama with the Beatles and Capitol Records, there was a separate royalty dispute between VJ and the Four Seasons. In spite of their successful albums, the group was not receiving any money from the record company. In January of '64, the Seasons left VJ and moved to Philips Records. Unfortunately, in the settlement of the lawsuit, VJ retained release rights for all material the band had recorded for the label. And the group was obligated to deliver one final album to VJ. But when VJ was finally declared bankrupt in 1966, the Four Seasons VJ catalog went to the band to settle unpaid royalties, and the tracks were then reissued by Philips Records. The change of label didn't diminish the popularity of the Four Seasons, and neither did the onslaught of Beatlemania and the British invasion. However, in 1964, their song Dawn Go Away was kept from the #1 spot on the top Hot 100 by no fewer than 3 Beatles singles during the month of March. And then a few weeks later, the top 5 slots, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the top 100 hits, all filled by the Beatles. There was a 2-record set dubbed The Beatles versus the Four Seasons, the International Battle of the Century. And this was VJ Records. They were trying to cash in on their 2 hottest groups. It didn't chart, but it's now quite a collector's item. So the 1960s, they were a time of incredible upheaval in society, fashion, attitudes, and especially music. Before 1963, the music of the 60s still reflected the sound, style, and beliefs of the previous decade. Many of the hit records were by artists who had found mainstream success in the 1950s, like Elvis Presley, Dion, the Everly Brothers. In 1963 and the years to follow, a number of social influences changed what popular music was. It gave birth to the diversity and the experimentation that's still around today. The assassination of President Kennedy, the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement all impacted the mood of American culture, and the music began to reflect that change. The British invasion also began around 1963 with the arrival of the Beatles on the music scene, and that changed the way people would view and interact with music and musicians forever. By 1969, the Four Seasons' popularity had declined, with public interest moving more towards rock with a harder edge, but also for music with more socially conscious lyrics. But although they stopped producing hits, the Four Seasons never lost their popularity as a performing act. Since 1970, they've been known as Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. Different members have come and gone, and at this point, Frankie Valli is the only original member of the band who continues to tour. The band's original lineup was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1990 and joined the vocal group Hall of Fame in 1999. In 2005, a jukebox musical play called Jersey Boys, based on the lives of the Four Seasons, was a hit on Broadway. winning 4 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, Best Actor, Best Featured Actor, and Best Lighting Design. When Jersey Boys was turned into a movie in 2014, director Clint Eastwood decided to cast actors from the play itself rather than more marketable and recognizable film stars. This was an interesting decision, but he defended it, and he said that even though he was pressured to cast more famous leads, he refused, saying, "You've got people who've done 1,200 performances. How much better can you know a character?" So they used the people from the play in the movie. And the film ended up doing fairly well. It grossed about $67 million worldwide. Not too bad for a bunch of guys from Jersey. So, really good to see you again today, everybody. I hope you have a good and safe Thanksgiving. It will be different this year, but I know that there's hope. We just have to get through a few more months, and then we'll all be together again. Thanks so much. Take care.